Welcome to the Rust Belt Rundown, brought to you by Rust Belt Recruiting. This podcast is designed to shine a light on the meaningful work being done in Northeast Ohio and the surrounding region. We will convene manufacturing executives and Northeast Ohio business leaders for candid discussions about their business, regional happenings, industry trends, entrepreneurship, and more. Now, let's get running on the rundown.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 27 of the Rust Belt Rundown, a Rust Belt recruiting production. I am your host, Paul O'Connor, and on this episode, we are joined by Dan Moulthrop, CEO of the City Club of Cleveland. Dan, welcome to the podcast, man. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate it.
All right, so let's jump in. So you started your schooling on the East Coast. I'm an East Coast guy. You went to the prestigious Petty School in New Jersey.
Funny. It's so funny that you call it the prestigious Petty School, because it wasn't when I went there.
And look at how it changed. Look at how it changed. So actually, that's actually a good even starting point. So
yeah,
talk to us about that. What was it when you went, and what caused the transformation?
Well, it was all me. I mean, my presence really. No, shortly after, when I went there, it was, and I graduated in 1991. So I started there kind of mid-late 80s, 1987 as an eighth grader. And I'll tell you a quick story that will demonstrate what kind of a place it was. There was like the first dance that weekend, the weekend that, wasn't like homecoming or whatever, but it was like the first weekend of school in September. And somebody tried to, was tripping on either LSD or PCP or something and tried to jump out of a dorm room window. And the ambulances come up and all of that. And that sort of thing wasn't that uncommon there, right? So that's like, Petty was at the time, not a top tier school. I think even, like the folks who are there now and who were there then would say, yes, it was not a top tier school. And, but you could still get a great education there. And I was a day student and I went there to get, to get a great education. I got to do like honors, yada, yada stuff and all of that. And I was editor of the paper, and really, I loved my time at Petty. But shortly after I graduated in 91, and I think it was 1993 or so, when Walter Annenberg dropped a $100 million endowment gift on the Petty School. And that was the largest gift ever given to an independent school in the United States of America at the time. And it's still probably one of the largest.
What prompted that? Walter
Annenberg was a graduate. He was an alum.
I sure hope so.
And he was absurdly wealthy. And he was wealthy and an entrepreneurial, a very successful entrepreneur, even when he was at Petty. When he left Petty, his graduation gift to the school was a track.
I know. Okay.
Yeah. And so, and he had, he was a great philanthropist, and that school meant a great deal to him. And it was a transformative gift. People talk about transformative gifts all the time. This was a truly transformative gift that took Petty from where it was to being prestigious, as you've said, to being one of the top tier schools in the Northeast, if not the nation, able to diversify its student body and offer, because it was a very white place when I went there, and it's still predominantly white, I believe, but is more diverse now, able to offer a lot of scholarships, a lot of merit-based academic scholarships and need-based scholarships, for students wherever they may be. So it's gotten more international. It's gotten much more diverse in every way. And the academic rigor has really gone, through the roof.
Well, with $100 million, especially in 1993, you can do a lot. And you should do a lot. You should do a lot. Awesome. So I took a look, obviously did some research on you and your career and your background, and I came kind of across a theme. And one of the themes around you and your background is that you like to create conversations, whether it be you are a podcast host, you were the founder of the Civic Commons. Now, obviously your work with the City Club of Cleveland, in a time where I think conversation over the last 18 months has happened and has needed to happen, but not everybody likes to have those conversations. And I'm not even necessarily referencing the tough ones or the harder ones, but just in general, what motivates you to create conversations around important issues?
I'm glad you identified a theme, because to me, my career feels totally ad hoc and haphazard. But I would say that you're right. When I look back, there's a thread, there's that thread of conversation and dialogue. And a lot of it, I think, like, goes back to high school when I was doing scholastic journalism, interviewing people, and I got really into oral histories and things like that. And I feel that, I mean, at its heart, what we're doing right now, this conversation, I form words, you ask questions, I answer them, I ask you questions, you answer them. This whole thing that we're doing of exchanging ideas and sharing our own narratives, that's fundamentally about like what it means to be human, right? To connect. E.M. Forster, in his book, A Passage to India, the epigram is short. It says, only connect. And like, that's what it means to be human, is just to connect with people. And also I believe that, like, when we make connections, when we are able to understand one another, we can find empathy for one another, and we can find solution, we can find common ground. And those are the ingredients to the solutions for the problems that vex us.
Yeah.
So
that's such a good point. I love that. Only connect. I think most of the time, if not all, I never want to speak in 100% assumptions, but most of the time when someone sees something and they don't understand it, or they fear it, or whatever, it's just from lack of exposure. So those kind of go hand in hand of just connect, only connect. And if you don't have that opportunity, well, then you don't understand it. And then lack of understanding usually leads to fear, or them versus us, and we're the right, they're the wrong. And it's just purely lack of exposure. So I love that concept, just kind of only connect.
Yeah, 100%. I used to be a school teacher. I taught high school English, and before that, I taught in a county jail in San Francisco. And because I was teaching English and literature, and when I was working in the county jail, I would work with students, usually using literature, short stories or plays or things like that would allow us to talk about ideas and allow us to connect with one another. I mean, I also taught like GED prep, but the real fun stuff was when, like, we were sitting around taking roles and reading, and reading a play or reading a short story and talking about what it means. And even then, like, it was essentially, there was a lot of my teaching was very Socratic in nature, right? Based on like questions and answers and conversation and discussion, and really exploring ideas and connecting the ideas in a piece of work to somebody's life, to the individual student's life, and all of that. So yeah, I mean, that's why that's important. And it happens to be what I've done a lot in my life.
So with your background in creating conversation, it makes sense that you started freelance writing over 15 years ago at this point. Talk to us about what made you start writing, because clearly, there are people who are great oral communicators, horrible writers, vice versa, and then people that can do both. So tell us, one, what motivated you to start writing, and then two, some of your work, because it's kind of expansive.
So thanks. I always enjoyed writing. And when I got into teaching, the thing that was still tugging at me was this desire to practice journalism. And so it was around the year that I turned 30 that I, shifted careers, stopped teaching, and went to graduate school for journalism. And that was, what I wanted to do then, what I thought I wanted to do. I mean, it's sort of funny, you have desires, and then like life chooses certain, you make choices, but also, you say yes or no to these opportunities that come up. And so I got into the writing that I've done through journalism and doing, standard reporting for daily newspapers, but then also while I was in grad school, I co-authored a book with Nineveh Caligari and Dave Eggers about the experience of teachers in America. And that book did a couple of different things. It was largely, it was a lot of oral histories with teachers. So just spending time with teachers, talking to them about their lives and listening to their stories and how they see the work they do, the importance of the work they do, and it's, what the impact that they believe it's having. I don't see the book up here. It's around somewhere. Oh yeah, here it is. This book right here. Do you know this book?
No.
Working by Studs Terkel?
I do not.
Studs Terkel was one of the greatest journalists of the 20th century. In this book, Working, people talk about what they do all day and how they feel about what they do. It's and you can see, like, I got like all these notes in it and stuff. It's a fantastic book, and probably one of the most, in terms of books that have influenced me, definitely one of the books that has influenced me the most. And that informed how we did that piece. It was a lot of oral histories, and then it was reported pieces about how certain school districts or schools were changing the way that they pay teachers in order to shift the work and shift the job and shift how teachers themselves feel about it, how they feel valued. But also, when you shift how people are compensated, you change the kinds of people who choose that profession. Yep. As we're seeing right now with like the Great Resignation and the ways in which the world of work is being remade. So we worked on that book together, and collaborating with a writer like Dave Eggers is just an incredible experience. I mean, I don't know if you've read any of his books at all, but he's a gifted writer. And he is one of those people, he's a rare kind of writer in that he writes as fluidly in fiction as he does in nonfiction. And he's a great listener and a great reporter and a great thinker. And he's just like, it was really, that was a formative moment for me to learn how to write alongside, with him as a mentor.
And it must just be it always feels like such a daunting task though. Like I always want to go to step one. Like, okay, you got past the point of, I want to write a book. You're motivated to do it. You're going to do it. Let's say you even meet David, you meet someone you're going to collaborate with. Like, what is step one?
Oh, you make a plan. Step one was to we kind of mapped out. I think the first thing we did was map out a table of contents. What do we think?
The chapters and what do you, okay.
Yeah. Got it. And then you kind of, there's a lot of ways that people go about it, but I think what we did was we mapped out a table of contents and thought okay, here are the different issues we'd want to touch on, different ways we'd want to get at it. And then you just start chipping away at it. It's like, Annie Lamott, the writer, has that book Bird by Bird. That's how you write things. You just got to write it bird by bird, one bird at a time. She had a book, goes back to some report she had to write about birds as a child, and her father was or mother just said, well, just do it bird by bird. You don't have to write it all at once. Yep. Right. And it's like that adage about eating an elephant one bite at a time.
Yep.
And you just do it. And it was really interesting. I mean, we wrote the first draft of that book inside of 6 months. And wow. And it just because that was we set out to do that, and we had a deadline, and we promised to deliver it to the publisher. So we had to do it. And when you wake up in the morning and you sit down and you just sit down and it's your job, that's what you do. It's doable.
Yep.
A friend of mine, one of the things that prepared me mentally to know that it's possible, a friend of mine is a founder of National Novel Writing Month. Are you familiar with National Novel Writing Month?
I am not.
Sometimes referred to as NaNoWriMo. And this was founded, NaNoWriMo was founded like 20 years ago or something like that, in, decades before the current trend of shortening everything, like Homecoming to HOCO and Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse to Romo Fijo. So NaNoWriMo is my friend Chris Beatty, who said, I want to write a novel, but I know I'm not going to be able to do it by myself. I'm not going to be able to lock myself away somewhere and just write a novel. So I need certain constraints, right? I need certain conditions, right? And one of the conditions was he needed some folks to do it with him. Another condition was he needed to know that it wasn't going to take forever. So he created National Novel Writing Month. He declared that November would be National Novel Writing Month. This is like from his apartment in Oakland, California. And and it started out by just getting I think it was 7 or 8 people. And they would meet every night at this cafe and write for 2 or 3 hours. And if you write 1,500 words a day for 30 days, you get to something that is novel length, about the length of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, right? A short novel.
Yeah. And
you can do that, right? You can get to 50,000 words that way. And so that was the plan. And that's what they did. And it was all like quantity, not quality.
Yep.
And his other phrase, his other sort of aphorism is no plot, no problem. Just keep writing.
Just right.
Yeah. And so I knew, if Chris could do that, if that worked, then it really is just a matter of sitting down and writing your 1,000 to 2,000 words a day. And, for us, that meant doing a lot of reporting, doing a lot of, I interviewed 100 teachers for that book, transcribed the interviews, edited the transcripts, all of that stuff. I mean, that was work, but I knew what the work was. I knew how to do it. And the hardest part was finding it wasn't, it was 2005 or 2003 we were doing this, right? So really early internet, or pre-social media internet.
Yep.
All you really had were emails that you hoped you could reach out to somebody and they might forward your email to somebody else and they might reach out to you and say, yeah, I really want to share my story.
Yep.
So it took, that part took a while, and that was hard to source geographically diverse, racially diverse, to find those stories from all over the country from different kinds of teachers. But it was great. I mean, it was phenomenal. But that's how you do it. You create the table of contents is like your plan, and then you just start figuring out how to chip away at the plan. And then you cannot be afraid of revising your plan, right? Because there are going to be times when you get in there and you're like, this chapter doesn't make sense. We need another chapter that does this. And then, by the way, we need to do this other thing. So yeah.
Bird by bird.
Bird by bird.
That's it.
Exactly.
All right. So let's shift gears a little bit. For people unfamiliar with the City Club of Cleveland, tell us about the history of the organization itself and then the work that you do in Cleveland.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So the City Club's been around since 1912, founded by a group of young civic leaders during the Progressive Era, who, coming out, there was a time in Cleveland's history, like the early 1900s, specifically though, after 1910, it had 10 years of Mayor Tunnell Johnson's administration. And in that period of time between 1910 and 1920, you see all of these major organizations being founded. There's been an incredible amount of wealth created by people like Rockefeller and Wade and all these names that you know. And then they started turning their attention, their energy that had been devoted to capitalist enterprise towards civic enterprise. And they created the Center for Community Solutions, the United Way, the Cleveland Foundation, the Cleveland Orchestra, the City Club of Cleveland, the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Western Reserve Historical Society. All of these organizations are created inside of this time, these organizations that we now think of as being the fabric of our community. The City Club, the idea of the City Club came from a graduate student who was at Western Reserve. He'd been a member of the City Club of St. Louis. And the notion of a City Club, every municipality that cared about rooting out graft and corruption had a City Club. It was a place where people who cared about the community could come together and find fellowship in their civic nerdiness. And regardless of whether they were on the right or the left or anything, right? It was just a place where people could come together and talk about the issues and maybe find solutions to them. So this graduate student, Mayo Fessler, had been a member of the City Club of St. Louis, and he brings the idea to one of his professors, Augustus Hatton, who says, "Oh, what a great idea. Let's talk to these guys. I know a bunch of guys downtown who would be really interested in this." So he starts shopping the idea around and convening these meetings with people like Newton D. Baker and Mayor Johnson and judges and newspapermen and business leaders and so forth. And there's a lot of momentum around this idea. So in October of 1912, they have a meeting, and they have the guy come from the City Club of St. Louis to sort of say, hey, here's how it works. And then they say, all right, well, do we want to do this? The answer seems to be yes. So they sell that day 70 $10 shares in the City Club. And with like $700, they kickstart the City Club in 1912. And the idea is
$700 in 1912.
I know, that's not bad, right? Yeah. And $10 shares, right? That would be like, I don't know, $500 today or something like that. But you can, but it's how you get stuff started, right? Yep. And they created this place where it was a social club with a civic purpose. People would come together to meet regularly. They would have lunch there and things like that. And then they would also have speakers once a week. And back then, once a week meant like once a week during the season. So like September to May or something like that, because people went away for the summers. And they would meet on Saturdays for the speakers. Well, over the ensuing century, they moved the Saturday meetings to Fridays. And then eventually we start doing programs on more days than just Fridays. And today we do 120 programs a year for the benefit of the community.
Wow.
During the Cleveland mayoral race, there were 2 primary debates and a general election debate that were televised. Those were the debates that the City Club convened. Wow. The last time Barack Obama spoke in Cleveland, he spoke at a City Club of Cleveland event. We've hosted sitting US presidents, we've hosted visiting heads of state, and we've hosted community activists. We have conversations about education, the economy, politics, policy, the environment, the future of Lake Erie, everything that matters to the city of Cleveland and to the broader, greater Cleveland community. We're having a conversation about it at the City Club. So today I just had a lunch. Our director of programming and I had lunch with 2 City Club members who are volunteers who run our debate committee. And we are planning out what debates we're going to do next year, because we have all these statewide races, right? And some of them are very important when you think about the future of democracy and the future of democratic participation. So the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, the governor, the lieutenant governor, all of that stuff, right? All that's happening next year. We have a Senate race as well next year. There will be, when there are debates in Cleveland, chances are the City Club will be involved, if not the only organization involved in convening these things. We have roughly right now somewhere between 800 and 900 members. We're a member-supported organization. So we get money from philanthropy and corporate donations as well. But members, those 800 to 900 members, are probably the most important dollars that support the work that we do. And members also drive the conversations. They are making speaker suggestions all the time. They help to make the programs happen. And every program, I should say, is an hour in length. And the hallmark of every program is that in the second half, questions come from the audience. Questions are always coming from the audience. So what's amazing, I mean, it's like in some ways, it's a speaker series or blah, blah, blah. This is actually what democracy, one of the things that democracy looks like, right? Democracy looks like a forum devoted to freedom of speech, devoted in the community, where anybody, for the price of lunch, or even with a free ticket that you manage to get, and it's not that hard to find yourself a free ticket to the City Club, you get to be in the room with somebody who wants to be president, right? Or wants to run the state, or has a big idea, or is a visiting author, and you can ask them a question. You can raise your hand and be the next person who asks them a question, and that question might change the course of the conversation. it might have an impact and help us see things in a new light. And that happens all the time when the questions from our community, from our very well-informed and deeply engaged community, change the course of the conversation.
Active engagement, so important. Yeah. So with you guys, I mean, 2020 and this year had to just kind of rock your entire structure. I mean, you guys are an in-person organization that facilitates conversations peer-to-peer. Yeah. So how did you guys pivot? What did it look like?
The first thing it looked like is like erasing the calendar, right? So we had at any given moment pre-COVID, we would have, programs planned out for the next 3 to 6 months. And we just wiped that out entirely. And then started, and at the time, you remember March 2020, the only thing people wanted to talk about was COVID.
Yeah.
And the only thing anybody needed to talk about, the only thing we wanted to, it was all COVID all the time. It was like policy around, it was like what it is, how it works, how to protect yourself. And then like, what's the policy response? How are we going to get through this? What's the impact on the economy? So, where do we get, when's the vaccine going to come? All of that stuff, right? And so we changed the content very quickly. And we just as quickly had to shift to a digital platform. I mean, it's amazing. You and I are having this conversation on Zoom right now. And 3 years ago, if you'd sent me a Zoom link, I would have been like, what is this?
What is this?
Right?
This guy wants to talk to me on video. Just call my cell phone.
What the hell? Like, can't we just what? And so so we started out on Zoom, doing our forums on Zoom and inviting people to these giant Zoom calls, and we got Zoom bombed, like really bad. Do you remember how bad people got Zoom bombed? Like we got Zoom bombed really bad. The only thing, it was all pornography and very explicit pornography. But we didn't get any of the hate speech. Some people got Zoom bombed with hate speech and real like awful kinds of, aggressive things. This was just like people having fun and, clowning kind of, And it's just like, it's fine. We actually, so after that experience, we found another platform. We started using a platform called StreamYard, which allows us to broadcast, send what we're doing through YouTube, live stream it on our webpage. All of that made a lot more sense for what we were trying to do. And we also learned a whole lot about like locking down security on Zoom calls.
Yeah.
But at the time, nobody knew anything about that.
No,
so we actually,
everything was open-ended. Then you would have passwords and closed link.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing.
It was crazy. So we wound up using our experience to provide like a kind of learning for the whole community. We made the best, made a little lemonade out of those lemons. And actually people seem to really appreciate that. But fully a third of our revenue, anywhere from 25 to 30% of our revenue would come, and a third of our earned revenue for sure, or more, would come from ticket sales to live events.
Yep.
So we didn't have that. So our revenue projections were all off. Like we had to redo all of that. And then honestly, those first couple of months, I mean, those were existential moments for every organization before they came out with the Paycheck Protection Program, before, nobody knew how we were going to make it through.
No.
And
no. Basically until that, I don't think we really knew. And I was living in New York at the time. I don't think we really knew we were going to survive until late May.
Oh yeah.
I think, well, first of all of March. Yeah, that's gone.
Yeah.
All of April. And then I can't remember when in May that we found out, hey, we are going to receive the PPP. Right. But it was down to the final hour, where it was like next week we're laying people off or we're getting the loan, and that was it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember the stress of like calling our banker and trying to figure out like, hey, are we going to be able to get into this round? Because you remember that first round, they ran out.
It was insane.
It was so insane. And so anyway, but we, within it, by the time we get to that moment, we had figured out, okay, like you have to figure out all sorts of things. Like, how do you show up for your external stakeholders? How do you show up for the community? And how do you show up as an organization internally for one another? And, but we began to get a sense of what both of those things were going to look like. And then we just started creating programming, just continued to create more and more programming trying to figure out, what does our community want to be talking about right now? What is the conversation that our community needs right now? And so you go back and look through those archives, those times, like you'll see like program about mental health amidst the pandemic. By the time we got to the end of May, we thought people are going to want to start to talk. It feels like people want to talk about other things, about non-COVID things. And then George Floyd was murdered. And then those issues, that moment, all of those issues, they took over the entire dialogue that every community across the country was having. And those are the conversations that we were having too for the next couple of months from so many different angles. But eventually, I mean, it's crazy, right? Like now we're here, December 21, and thinking back to, this is like fully 21 months, right, into this pandemic, right? Like this time a year ago, we were like, I thought we'd be through this already, right? And here we are.
Sometimes I talk to people and 2021 almost seems weirder than 2020 was, because at least 2020, it was something the whole world was going through. Everything was new. There was this sense of pure shutdown, right? For at least 3 to 4 weeks, probably a month, depending on where you lived. Right. And it almost seemed, now that I look back on it, it almost seemed more manageable in 2020 sometimes than it did in 2021. I agree.
I don't know.
But it almost was like, what, to your point?
2020 was the year we all thought like the world was gonna could collapse.
100%.
I mean, democracy was on the brink, right? You had in the midst of, I don't know how you spend every day, but I remember every day, every morning looking at COVID numbers, right? And there were certain routines that I built up to just kind of manage, you're working from home, you're stuck in your sweatpants, you're fighting with your kids over who's got Wi-Fi bandwidth. And amidst all of that stress, you had the race between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And
it was insane.
And the first part of the year too, right? You had all the Democrats trying to figure out who's going to be, who it would be until it was finally Biden. And then you had this race between America's grandpa and America's crazy ass uncle, right? That's what it was.
It's a good way to put it. It's a very good way to put it.
And it was, God, and the strife and everything and the weird, and it really did feel like two totally different nations. And it's hard. I know that we're still there in some ways. There's still a lot of people who are still kind of relitigating that in their mind and they're hanging on to all of that. But it is hard to remember just how divisive that moment was.
Oh my
goodness. Then the culmination in January 6th.
Yeah.
Which was just it was so weird. I mean,
that was surreal. That honestly, right. It was a cap of probably the 4.5 craziest years.
Yeah.
I don't want to say, I'm 32. So I can only speak for my 32 years, but my life, besides 9/11, this was it. I mean, this was absolutely insane to watch. It was surreal. And I agree with you. There was this point there, a couple points, I would say, in 2020 and then ending in January 6th, where the inner thought of I don't know if we will make it, right? I don't know what America will look like in the next 6 months. Right. It was, so I agree with you. Yeah, I agree. 2020 was crazy. I think from the mindset of 2021, I just felt like people were just fatigued about it. So people eventually, I think, just said, they just chose individually, I'm done. I'm not, now again, I'm not wearing a mask, or I'm going to, whatever you're saying, but they individually, because in 2020, you couldn't say that. You couldn't.
Right.
But they just kind of gave up. They're just what, I'm going to dinner, or I'm traveling, or, whatever it was. So it just, that almost felt crazy to manage too, because it was well, who's doing what? You go to this state, you're wearing masks. You go here, you can do whatever you want. It was crazy.
Yeah. It is bizarre, the whole thing. And that we're still here, we're still in it.
Yeah.
Right. Like nothing, things aren't changing. Like, I mean, things are changing. They're shifting a little bit here and there, but you know, we went for the City Club. We went for, I guess about 15 or 16 months without doing an in-person program.
Wow.
Everything was virtual. And then we finally got to, you remember in the summer, last summer, it sort of felt like, okay, this might be dying down.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end of July, we're like, okay, we're going to start doing in-person programs. And it was the right decision. And then in October, we instituted a vaccine mandate for our programs for, you know, attendance, like Playhouse Square and Severance, you know, and other places, and the Happy Dog too, right? They've all got these vaccine mandates. And, you know, and we got to the point, and I remember having a conversation with Gina Vernacci over at Playhouse Square about it. And she's like, well, this whole thing was like, in retrospect, it's a lot easier to turn everything off than it is to turn it back on again. You know, just from an operational standpoint.
Yep.
You know, you just sort of say, oh, everything's canceled and people stop coming, right? Yep. But if you say, hey, we're open again. No, we're open again. Like, right, like you can't, it's hard to get people to come back.
Yeah. And
that takes time. So we've been like slowly building, you know, building audience, building crowd again. And still there's some people who are, you know, I'm going to watch it online. I'm just fine doing that, you know?
Yep.
But for me, like I need to see people in person. Yeah. Like I need that. I need that human face-to-face, even masked, like that face-to-face can reach out and like, and, you know, and like grab you by the shoulders and like, and see your eyes. Like that's something that I really need. And I think there are a lot of people, I mean, again, fundamentally human kind of thing, only connect, right? Just to come back to that for a second. Sometimes you need to be in somebody's physical presence.
Yeah, 100%. So let's talk about 2022. What does that look like in terms of events, speakers, content? What are you guys focusing on? And then are there specific things? I know you mentioned obviously all the elections too, happening across the state, but are there any issues specifically to Cleveland that you guys are focusing on?
This is such an exciting time for our city because there's this tremendous transition in leadership that's happening. You're, you know, not only in the big offices like the mayor of Cleveland and county executive, where you feel like it's inevitable that these things are going to the next generation. Like interestingly, the office of mayor in the city of Cleveland just skipped Generation X, right? It went from boomer to millennial.
Yep.
Right? My generation, it's your generation's turn. My generation just you know, skipped in that office. But the same thing also happened to the Gun Foundation. You know, it's one of the biggest foundations in the nation, certainly one of the largest private foundations in Ohio, and just went from boomer to millennial with you know, with Tony Richardson as the incoming president there. He's almost 40 years old or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It's super exciting. Yep. And so, and then you have like leaders who have been, in spite of kind of the stagnation around them, you have leaders like Brian Zimmerman at the Metro Parks, who have just been like changing our like physical landscape and really like hugely improving the city and the region. And it just feels that with the change in leadership, the widespread awareness of the importance of focusing on racial equity and working towards racial equity.
Yep. With
the changing understanding of what our criminal justice system is and how it can work and how we can make it more just and more fair. With the kind of changing understanding and more nuanced understanding of what's happening, what the social determinants of health are that are holding people back. And similarly, like the social determinants of economic opportunity that are holding people back. Things feel like we could really shift how we deal with problems, how we solve problems in our community. When we get, and there's like, by the way, $1 billion in federal money that is being spent inside of Cuyahoga County right now, or available inside of Cuyahoga County to solve some of these problems, thanks to the American Rescue Plan Act. I'm pretty excited. So all of that stuff, that's the stuff we're going to be talking about a lot
Yep.
Whether it's workforce development or economic development, education, innovation, healthcare reform, whatever it is, like criminal justice reform, like those are the issues that we're going to be talking about a lot.
Have you heard more about the Amtrak between the 3Cs of Ohio? Because I saw that may have been green lighted.
No, I don't know. I mean, like, there's like some major public transit things that might happen.
Yeah.
That would be, the inner city kind of things. Like people also talk about the Hyperloop. All of that stuff, I will believe it when I see it. Those are very expensive modes of transportation to build. And if they happen, that'll be absolutely wonderful. But there are a lot of things. I mean, there are a lot of things standing in the way of those kinds of projects. Right now, we can't even put a single wind turbine on the lake, right? Because of regulations in our state are holding back that project. People have been working on that for, I think, about 15 years now, and they haven't been able to do this. And I don't know why our people in our state, legislators in our state, and regulators or whomever are so opposed to it. The transition to cleaner energy is not a weather question, like a whether or not to do it question. It's inevitable. It's how fast are we going to do it at this point? So those are interesting. I think there's lower hanging fruit to get at in terms of making our city more livable and making public transit work better for more people and making transit generally more modes of transit, right? I mean, you've lived in New York City, what kind of people-centered things have happened there in the past decade to transform Times Square from like the worst, most dangerous intersection on the planet to like a pedestrian zone, right?
Yeah.
Or to create access along the Hudson River and the southern tip of the island so that you can ride your bike, or you can walk, or you can run, or you can rollerblade or whatever without fearing for your life. Shutting down Central Park on every weekend so that people can actually enjoy it and not worry about taxi cabs hitting them, right? Like that sort of stuff. That's the low-hanging fruit that has never been harvested in Cleveland. We have overbuilt roads, right, that are wider than they need to be, 6-lane boulevards that are carrying 1 lane's worth of automobile traffic. We could be expanding bike access and creating these extraordinary corridors for connectivity for pedestrian and two-wheeled connectivity with scooters and electric bikes and so forth. That's the kind of thing that I think we're probably going to start seeing, which ultimately is good for everybody, right? Yeah. And it's just a more small d democratic mode of doing street development so that more people have access to wherever they need to go.
Yep. Even though Times Square is a little bit more walkable, don't go. Just skip it.
No, no. Like the pictures. I mean, you look at those. We had Jeanette Sadiq Khan, who was Mayor Bloomberg's like, I forget what her title was, but she is the person who shut down Times Square and put out the cafe tables, right? And like, you just take two side-by-side pictures from the same location. You're like, holy cow,
crazy,
right?
Crazy,
and nobody loses in that scenario. There's nobody. I mean, so you traffic over on 10th Avenue or 8th Avenue or whatever. It's just like it's the same thing. It doesn't matter. You didn't need to go right there.
Yep.
We have so little traffic here. It's insane.
Oh, no, I know. I tell people all the time. I always joke like Jobs Ohio has this massive marketing and advertising campaign to try and attract people from the coasts, the expensive cities and all that stuff. And all I tell them all the time is just say no traffic. You can get anywhere in 20 minutes, in 20 minutes. And no matter the time, it's 8 a.m., 5:30 p.m. If I leave my house right now, it's 5:50. I could get anywhere in Columbus in 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, that's it. Hard stop. That's the selling point. Like you don't need to say anything else.
Yeah.
We can get to housing later and all the cool stuff.
Did you grow up here?
I grew up in Connecticut. My wife grew up in Columbus, so her family's here, and then we moved back. But I always tell people, it's like, you don't understand. Like, and then when you talk to people from Ohio, they'll look at 5:30 traffic where there's just more cars on the road, but you're going 65 miles an hour. It's like, no. Traffic means you have no hope. it's dead
Yeah,
stop.
traffic's like you're stuck on the highway.
It's over
on 580 or 880. That was my nemesis in California. Yeah. And it's going to take you 30 minutes to go 2 miles.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Okay, so let's go to just the overall concept of free speech, which is obviously kind of the mission statement and the belief behind the City Club. But how have you conditioned yourself to accept free speech in your forum, especially when you may not agree with it? Because I think everyone can not agree with something and be like, yeah, okay, that's a good opinion. But what if it's pure ignorance, let's say, or what if it's a truly like not necessarily a good rooted question, when that happens, or what happens in those environments when those questions get asked?
Well, I mean, there are a few moments that have tested my commitment to freedom of speech. And, in general, and what I feel and what I believe is that a truly inclusive community, like a community that will thrive, has to be truly inclusive, right? We have to, and for democracy to work, we have to believe in it, right? And we have to believe in the power of ideas and the power of persuasion. Now, the reality is that not even politicians believe in that anymore. I don't know if they ever did. Mostly politics is about power and about consolidating power and about trying to box out the other guy and the other party. But still, at its heart, policy making is about ideas and figuring out the best ideas and the best solutions to problems. And so you have to hear from people. You have to listen and you have to think about it. And the extremes are useful because they kind of lay out the boundaries of what's possible, right? The Overton window, right? Here's, somewhere between I don't know, say Kevin McCarthy and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right? It's right. And so we're in the middle, right? We're somewhere, we wind up at Joe Manchin. And that's okay, right? For me, that I'm really interested in that because I'm interested in hearing for me personally, I'm interested in hearing all of these different ideas. People who are huge fans of the Squad or huge fans of Trump or whatever it is, right? And I've been in those shoes, right? I voted for Ralph Nader. I also voted for John Kasich. I've had a lot of different opinions, and I know that feeling of no, this is the right way. We have to do this. I know what it feels like to be a strident believer, a true believer in your point of view. But I know that the reality is that our government exists in this, this is the structure of our government. And politics is the tool by which we have chosen to govern, right? Small d democratic politics is the tool by which, as a nation, we've chosen to govern ourselves. And what that tool is designed to do is to find compromise, right? And it's designed to not swing too far to the left or right. So I see that the work that we do is about, particularly when it comes to politics and politicians, is about giving them a venue to float ideas, to really connect authentically with their constituents and with the people they either do serve or want to serve, and to get their reaction, to hear their questions. There aren't too many places in America where you could, like I said before, where you can be in that room, right? There's a lot of ways to get into that room otherwise, by making a political contribution, right? But you have to know somebody, right? You have to be connected. But for an ordinary person to be able to be in that room and provide that feedback and ask that question, it only happens at the City Club. Now, there are times when we've invited people whose views may be objectionable, whose views some people will definitely find objectionable. But I kind of believe, a lot of people who believe in freedom of speech, that's okay. They're entitled to those ideas. Those ideas are not going to hurt me. Those ideas are not going to infect me, right? They may challenge me. They may they may invite my interrogation, but they're just ideas, right? And they're not going to harm me. There's that speech, whether it's Corey Lewandowski or Ilan Pappé or whomever, right? Or from the right or the left, it's okay. Like, it's just part of the dialogue. Now, that said, there are some, I think we're in a different era now where that kind of everything's okay, freedom of speech is, there was a moment like 10, 20 years ago where the City Club issued an invitation to David Duke.
Wow.
And he ultimately declined the invitation because I think he found out that he would be pretty much roasted at the City Club, that there's like there's a Q&A with the audience, it's unfiltered. And he realized, like, somebody's going to ask me questions that are just that I don't want to answer. So he declined the invitation. We would not, if David Duke is still around, still doing the same asinine BS, racist, white supremacist BS that he's been doing, we would not invite him today. And we would not invite any of those like far right, alt-right, tiki torch carrying, jackholes. Like, I'm sorry,
no. Right there
we're not going to do it because I think at the time when that invitation was issued to David Duke, it was sort of like, let's use David Duke to show just how tolerant we are. Today, like, I think that was the idea.
Got it.
Today, it wasn't that like there's like a group of people who are like, I would really love to hear David Duke. It's more like, I want to invite David Duke so we can unmask him as being a total fraud.
Yeah.
Today, like, you couldn't pay me $1 million to bring Richard Spencer to the City Club. There's just no way we do it. Because we feel that we do have a responsibility to draw a line at hate speech. And we do have a responsibility to not offer the platform to people who would seek to destroy democracy. To people who do not stand for the same values and principles of inclusion and fairness and justice and equity that we stand for.
Like, you can be as strong in your beliefs as you want. And I think this is what you're getting at, right? Like, whether it's left or right, not too far right, or maybe not too far right, whether it's right or left, if you're not inciting violence, if you're not bringing other people down, if it doesn't come from this kind of like fear-based, evil-rooted thought process where whatever you're pitching, if it's raising this building, it's tearing this one down. Like, we're just not going to feature you. Because the whole point, going back to what you originally started saying, is, we want people who accept other people's points of view. We want people that accept other people's questions, right? Like, you can't just come and say, this is it.
We're interested in the dialogue. We're interested in the discourse. And, it's interesting, like, we had Corey Lewandowski several years ago in 2016, 2017 or something. It was 2017, I think. He came and he had, been the campaign director for a shockingly successful presidential campaign, right? That everybody said was going to fail, and it didn't. So he was offered to us, and I said, we should totally have him because if he'd been George Bush's campaign director, we would have said yes, sure. And like, may not like Donald Trump, but he's the president. This guy somehow managed to execute a strategy that led to his victory. So let's hear it.
I mean, I will still say it's the greatest marketing campaign in the history of marketing campaign.
It was I don't know if I'd agree with that. I think he came in with some baked in advantages in that your entire life, Donald Trump was on magazine covers. Your entire life. But every time you went to the supermarket, he was probably on a cover of a magazine. Right?
But okay,
and then for like most of your life, for at least 2/3 of your life, he had been on TV on a regular basis.
100%.
Was there. And so like he had some built-in advantages that brought in this electorate, this group of voters who had not been involved at all, right? And so he had some built-in advantages back in 2016. And it was a great market. It was also a great marketing campaign.
Yeah, and the only reason I say that it it's so crazy because I think people that had any sort of background information about him knew who he really was. And I always say, this guy can't, now, again, I don't want to get too far into it, but this guy is the definition of elite. He was born and raised in New York. He came from riches. So how he convinced people to vote against their own interest, to vote for someone who, now, again, back to your point earlier, like politicians are politicians. Like, I don't really believe any of them truly care, but here we are. He definitely doesn't. And how he did that, that's why I always say this is like the greatest campaign. Like, how did he do this? This is amazing. You have these people who make $30,000 a year voting for, quote unquote, on paper, billionaire. It's like, this makes no sense.
I know. No, you're absolutely right. But Lewandowski, in the end, what I was going to say is that it was a terrible speech. Wow. It was, he spoke, he told stories from the campaign trail, right? I'm sorry if my internet is like stopping.
You're back now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. There was no strategy. There was no philosophy. There was no defense of Trumpism. It was stories from the campaign trail. And then during the Q&A, he insulted the audience.
Wow.
There were like lifelong Republicans in the audience, stand-up people who've been elected officials and mayors of suburbs and so forth who asked questions. And he, really reasonable questions like, I'm a lifelong Republican. I'm a little concerned. This guy doesn't seem, tell me why I shouldn't be concerned. And he said, you know what I'm concerned about? I'm concerned about, the Senate Republicans not getting in line behind our president. I'm concerned about, all of this. And it was like, and then a couple of people were like, no, could you answer that question? Because it's a legit question. It's what a lot of Republicans and, Americans generally were worried about. And he wouldn't. He's like, no, I'm going to say what I want to say because I've got the podium now, and that's how it works. And it was like truly insulting to the audience. But I still don't regret that because that it was revelatory, right? Yep. The guy had earned his shot. He'd earned his position. He'd earned the chance to do that. He did it and revealed himself to be kind of a fraud.
Yep.
So, okay. There you go.
Can't get mad at you guys. You can get mad at him, but you can't, know what I mean? You provided
people got really mad at us and got mad at me in particular.
What?
And I spent like a week before the event trying to, having to defend myself against like city club members who were mad that he'd been given the platform, other people in the community who were mad that he'd been given the platform. I was on the radio show that I used to host, talking about it. It was hilarious. And it was a sold out program. It was very financially successful for the city club. Yeah. And we got to write, like an op-ed about it and all of that stuff. And in the end, Lewandowski hung himself. So it's fine.
Yep. Dan, this has been fantastic. Usually I will tell you these go about 20, 25 minutes and we are pretty much well over an hour. So we got to get you out of here. This was unbelievable. But we will get you out of here on this easiest question of the night. Highlight some local area Cleveland restaurants. What are your go-to dinner, lunch, breakfast spots, whatever you got?
One of my favorite spots is Doug Katz's restaurant, Zug, which is Israeli-inspired cuisine. Doug is just, he's just the nicest guy. He's a truly, restaurants are full of people who shout and like throw things at walls and things like that. And Doug is he's a great businessman. He's a truly nice guy. You go to eat there and he comes out and says hello and visits with you a little bit. And he's catered a couple of parties that we've thrown. And I just really like Doug. I love his food. And I think he's just fantastic. Awesome. I really do. Yeah.
And where is that? East side, west side?
Zug is on the east side at Cedar Hill, and right across the street from Dave's Supermarket. There's a little cafe right around the corner there, a bakery and cafe called Luna, which is also one of my favorite spots.
Awesome. All right. Well, Dan, listen, we really appreciate you coming on. This has been fantastic.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
next time I'm in Cleveland, we'll grab coffee or lunch, and we'll have you on again here soon too. So this
100%. And if you next time you're in Cleveland, if we got a City Club forum happening, let me know and you can be our guest.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate it, man. I'll talk with you soon.
Okay. Take care.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Rust Belt Rundown. Make sure you check us out at rustbeltrecruiting.com. The Rust Belt Rundown is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and click on 5 stars if you enjoyed this episode. See you next time.